you teach people how to treat you at work.
Oh.
And you have more power over how people respond to you than you think.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to TruthWorks. I'm Patty McCord, and I'm here with the lovely Jessica Neal.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey. And today we have Melody Wilding on with us. And what's interesting to me about Melody is her background is as a therapist. And so she comes to the world of coaching and leadership and sort of self-empowerment from a different background than a lot of our guests do. She's a professor of human behavior at Hunter College and was recently named one of Insider's most innovative career coaches. She's the author of Trust Yourself, Have Your Career and Happiness at Work. And so today we just want to talk to her about that and the interesting people she's met and talked to since she wrote the book. So welcome, Melody.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about you too.
Yeah.
Like how did this all come about? How do you go from therapist to like coaching and professor and human behavior? Well, I mean, obviously therapy is human behavior, but with organizations and work and things like that.
Well, I was born in New Jersey and no, I'm kidding.
We can go there.
Yes,
we can go there.
We're riveted. So, and actually not kidding though, but from a very, very young age, I was always told I was more sensitive than people. And I knew I was much more observant. I was that kid who was fine sitting in a room with all adults because I was just people watching and taking it all in. And that eventually led to me doing research in psychology. I worked at a human emotions lab for many years. And I loved that work. I loved the research side, but it was missing the practicality and the application. And so that's how I was led to, my background is in social work. And so from that into therapy. And once I graduated with my master's, this was a long time ago now. And so back then I started working for the very, very first online therapy company. But this was before, years before Talkspace, BetterHelp. And so the people who were attracted to the platform and using it were a lot of Silicon Valley types, a lot of startup founders, tech executives, very, very driven, career-oriented people who their identity was their work and their career. And they didn't want therapy in the traditional sense, which actually ended up working out because my style is much more pragmatic, solution-oriented. I want to take action and I want to do it yesterday. And so that's what they were looking for, really the combination of handling the mental, emotional side of work and their careers. And at that point, there was really no one filling that intersection. And so I shifted from doing therapeutic work to more coaching work. And now flash forward 13 years later, yes, I teach human behavior at Hunter College here in New York. So teach a lot about the DSM. I do coaching, I teach courses, and it's amazing to me how I've sort of pieced together this career because nothing is more fascinating to me than psychology in the workplace. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. Work is people, and it's only becoming more people-oriented, yet we're never having conversations about human behavior, motivation. And that's really, at the end of the day, how you are successful at work.
Well, I mean, you're speaking to Patty and, this is what we talk about.
What's interesting is listening to you and talking about back in the day, I was also consulting after I left Netflix with a lot of startups and startup CEOs. And I remember the blurry, globby amalgam that was executive coach. And so sometimes I would meet with CEOs and I was like, well, it sounds like she's your yoga teacher. Like, I mean, that sounds like that was a terrible and traumatic childhood incident on the playground that you had. But, we're talking about like a company here, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so did you kind of want to fall into like personally, giving them therapy? And how do you draw the line between like coaching for leadership and like individual therapy?
It's a fantastic question. The line is very blurry. I'm not afraid to say that. I think a lot of people are afraid to say that. I think a lot of people say they're extremely distinct. In my opinion, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
And some people may disagree with the lines I'm going to draw here. And certainly there are a lot of nuances, but for all intents and purposes, therapy, as you were saying, unpacking childhood, it tends to deal much more with unpacking the past, your family of origin, your history, your childhood, your upbringing, how those experiences have affected you, understanding those, and primarily gaining insight into those. Insight is really the thrust of therapeutic work. Trauma is also in the realm of therapy. If you have had big T or little t trauma in your life, will be much better served working on that with a therapist. You can work in conjunction with a coach, but you need someone who's really had proper training to walk you through that. Coaching, on the other hand, tends to deal with the present and the future. And so in my work, where I draw the line is we talk about the past insofar that it informs what you're doing in the present and the future. Someone may mention in coaching, as a child, I was the peacekeeper in my family. And actually, I'm finding I'm doing that with my team, that I'm afraid to rock the boat. I don't want to bring up conflicts. I have trouble giving people feedback. Okay, excellent insight. Let's coach on that and figure out, all right, you see this pattern. What do we do about it? So it's not staying there. It's more about the practical, tactical, action-oriented instead of just totally staying in the realm of the mental and emotional. Those are again, the lines are very blurry, but I try to recognize, I will also say one more thing, that therapy is needed when someone is not able to perform their day-to-day duties, where there is a lack of functioning. So if you are starting to have, let's say, like insomnia, or you're literally not able to get out of bed, you're not taking care of yourself, that's when a therapeutic intervention is needed. It goes beyond the realm of what a coach could help you with.
Super helpful. The other thing that I thought was really interesting when I internet stalked you, that I think's relevant to the things that Jessica and I will, and I'm going to let her talk, I really am. But one of the words that I rally against a lot is empowerment, right? And that HR people in particular and leaders have this magic wand and they touch people, and then suddenly it's like the job of the leaders to empower people. And what I love about listening to you and reading the stuff that you've done is that your message is like, whoa, that's your job. And so talk to me a little bit about that, about self-empowerment versus it being granted to you.
I also avoid the word empowerment. I also have an issue with the word authentic. Yeah, we could go on.
Let me be my authentic self.
Well, Jessica and I used it. When we worked together, we had a whiteboard that had HR buzzword bingo.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so whenever we'd get an email from somebody, it's like, oh, wow, this is a 10-star email. It's, it's empowerment.
Well, Melody can probably tell us why we say these things.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, psychological reason.
To be fair, I think it's a both and. I think, I believe workplaces, organizations, everyone wins when the culture is healthy and people do feel psychologically safe and everything. Yeah. So I'm not saying we should actively not do that. What I do believe is that as a professional, you can't wait for that to happen. And workplaces are always going to be workplaces. They're built, or they're filled rather, with imperfect, complex, sometimes frustrating people. And so the systems around us do need to change, do need to develop and grow and evolve. but that happens at a much slower pace than we can change. And the fact is that we're living in a time now, especially where every single person at every single level is being asked to do more with less. And we no longer live in a time where you can expect that your boss is going to advocate for you because they have their own pressures from your skip level manager that they're under. They have their own life outside of work. They may be dealing with things at home. You can't just wait for that to happen. You have to be able to find agency for yourself in the workplace, or at least have the confidence to say, I've tried everything I can. It's time for me to find a better environment for myself.
I wanted to ask you a question because you said this in the beginning when you started talking, that we and organizations don't pay enough attention or talk enough about the like psychology and behavior at work. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot else going on. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think we'll see a change in that as AI takes over more technical work. And so I think up until this point, there's been a lot of emphasis on being great at your craft, having good technical skills. You know, if you look at like all the skills reports from previous years, it's highly technical skills like engineering, computing, marketing. And now, if you look at skills reports, it's things like persuasion and creative thinking. It's more uniquely human skills that technology can't replace. And so I think up to this point, like we're starting to see the tides shift and starting to understand that there's so much information coming at us that understanding things like the psychology of how do you get buy-in for your message? Mm-hmm. I'm always talking with my clients about there's a difference between having a conversation with someone and creating accountability from that conversation. For example, one is just spewing information at a person, and the other one is putting mechanisms in place to create behavior change from that.
Give us an example there.
Yeah.
A big one is when it comes to, I work with a lot of people that are in very matrixed organizations. And so they may have to influence without formal authority over someone, and particularly people at the same level as them. So they may be delegating to their peers. And there's a difference between just having a conversation with your peer about something that needs to be done versus at the end of that conversation saying, okay, so today we've talked about X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do X. You mentioned you're going to do Y. Is there anything that would get in the way of you delivering that to me by Friday? Mm-hmm. That's more of a coaching accountability based conversation versus then just talking about what you needed to do.
I remember coaching product managers in particular. I'm like, you have a really unique job. You actually don't do anything. And your job is to get other people to do things that we want them to do with a smile on their face and a song in their heart. Right. So telling them that they have to probably gonna, bring out that smile on their face or the song in their heart. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the, even saying sensitive is hard for me because I'm not very sensitive. So like I used to say, like, sometimes you just got to nut up here. Right. You just
can't say that anymore,
but you can't say anything. But those kind of like, how do you give people some tips about how to make their behavior so that they can influence those things?
Yeah. So my first book, Trust Yourself, is all about this concept of being a highly sensitive professional. And it's important we have the right definition about what that means. Being highly sensitive means that you are someone who thinks and feels everything more deeply. It means that you have a more attuned, more active nervous system. So you're taking in more information, perceiving more of what's happening around you, processing that information more deeply. And so being highly sensitive doesn't automatically equate to crying all the time or just
tender.
Weak or tender is a good word. I like that. It means you're perceptive, you're thoughtful, you're a deeper processor. You also tend to be more intuitive because what brain scans show is that people who rate more highly on levels of sensitivity their brain has more activity in areas that synthesize information. So sensitive people may see connections before other people do, or may be able to take an idea from one business area, combine it with another business area, see risks before others do, and also have more active mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are empathy neuron. Basically, we pay more attention to other people's body language, tone, things like that. And so how this ties into psychology in the workplace is that when you're sensitive, you actually have a very unique edge in being able to influence and persuade people, because you're picking up on the subtleties of their behavior. So you can tell when, if you're presenting to a room of executives and you notice half the room starts disengaging. Someone else might just sort of blow past that and just keep presenting as they were. But if you're noticing that, maybe you shift your tone, or you say, actually, I want to make sure you're all with me. Is everybody following with what I'm saying? You can pivot on the spot. You're able to empathize with other people and understand what their pain points, their desires are, so that when you're crafting a message, you say what's in it for them, right? You're not just coming from, here's what I want here, but rather, here's what's in it for you and why this is going to help you, and make it more likely for them to say yes. So I think we talk a lot, and certainly, I write a lot about the challenges of being sensitive in the workplace and trouble with boundaries and things like that as part of that. But there's a lot of tremendous upsides, especially when it comes to navigating some of these abstract or higher level relational things that we're all starting to encounter more and more.
Jessica, maybe we are sensitive.
You know what, Patty, when you said that you're not sensitive, I was like, that is just untrue. You are sensitive. I think we're sensitive and can put ourselves in other people's shoes, but we're not afraid to stop and say those things and ask questions. And maybe someone that is more sensitive might be, or like more cautious, or, than we are.
Well, it depends on where you are in your life,
career,
and in your career, and where you are in the hierarchy. When you said most of the people that you work with are in matrix organizations, I would argue all of them are, whether the org chart spells that out or not. Right? Yeah. And that the most successful people I've known can operate really fluidly, regardless of what the structure says.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. And so what you're talking about, it's interesting when I listen to you, you are talking about skills. You're just talking about a very different set of skills. And what I love about categorizing them as skills is that you can learn a new skill.
Yeah, 100%.
You're not built that way forever.
Totally agree. And that's why, I've actually stopped saying sensitivity is a superpower. I used to say that, and I've stopped saying it because it's just a neutral attribute, right? It's a neutral, just like any personality or physical attribute, it's neutral. It's how you apply it and leverage it. Anybody can learn to do that. And like you were saying, influence is a skill. My new book is about managing up.
I want to talk about that, because when I hear manage up, I'm like, oh, I don't like people who manage up. But I think that's not what you mean. And when I did the research,
because you think about it as suck up.
Yeah, but there's like the people, for me, my impression of people that are very good at managing up, they're not very good at managing down, most always, and they're not really good at their jobs, right? But they're good at convincing the people at the top that they are, right? When I was like doing research on the book and then reading, I was like, well, that's not what she means at all. She doesn't mean this type of person. But tell us about that. And
what do you mean?
Yeah, what do you mean? And what motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, well, let me start there with what motivated me. And it was really after my first book, Trust Yourself, came out, people would come to me and say, okay, I feel more confident within myself now. I'm not doubting myself as much. I don't feel as insecure. I'm not in my head as much, except for one area, when it comes to dealing with people in authority. And Patty, you said the word hierarchy. And it was so fascinating to me how often those words were coming up again and again. Just, I have trouble dealing with the people in power. When I'm in a room full of executives, that's when I freeze up, just over and over. And I realized what a lot of people were coming to sessions and in my program saying, I just can't stop overthinking this email to my senior leader. Or I always feel like when I get this type of request from my boss, I can't say no. And I'm such a people pleaser. And they were blaming and shaming themselves for something that was actually the learnable skill of just learning to manage up. And I define that as strategically navigating the relationships with people that have more positional power than you. Most of the time, that is your boss. But a message I hope that comes across in the book is that managing up has to extend beyond your boss, because I think there's been this idea over, probably the past 30 years that managing up is something you do only when you have a bad boss, a difficult boss. They're micromanaging you, they give vague feedback, and that it's brown nosing, it's sucking up. It's not that at all. It's strategically building relationships with your boss and others in power to get what you need at work so you can do your best work. At the end of the day, managing up is really not about your boss at all. It's to benefit you and set yourself up for success.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in the book, you kind of describe it as like navigating power dynamics and all those things. Give us like a few different examples, stories of people who are really struggling with this. And then what did they do to get what they wanted?
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is in chapter 2 of the book, and that's called the Styles Conversation. So the entire book is based around these 10 conversations you need to have to manage up. Because what I also found frustrating is that people were being told, well, you need to manage up better. You need to know how to influence without authority.
Right.
They didn't know what that meant.
I always say that on your performance review, it's like you have some communication issues cross-functionally with other people who have, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and then the person like,
I don't know.
What is it? Yeah. And what am I supposed to do with it? So tell us, Melody, what are they supposed to do with that?
Yeah. Well, the other thing was that if you look online, it's usually basic platitudes like, get in your boss's head or come with solutions, not problems. But that's not very tactical. So, So this story in chapter 2, it's a real story. I was once working with 2 leaders at the same organization. They were peers. And so I really had this sort of backstage seat. It was really like a nice experiment between how 2 people were dealing with the same manager. And one person was really struggling with this manager. They were trying to get someone promoted. Their man was blocking them at every way. This person was taking that personally. They were thinking about quitting as a result. The other person was like the rock star. Yes, found this boss frustrating at times, but was able to overcome their resistance, to get buy-in for ideas, was able to have a bit more latitude in doing things independently. And I was like, what is happening here? And so when I stepped back and sort of looked at the difference between the two, it was really that one was able to flex to their boss's communication style, and one was unwilling to do that. And it was like they were just talking past each other. And so the point I make in that chapter is that you don't have to become a chameleon and totally contort and change yourself. If you are someone who's more effusive and emotional and people-oriented, you don't have to become totally process goal-oriented, a very short communicator. But you do have to flex your communication style so that probably the most important person in your career actually hears and receives what you're saying. And a classic example of this is when I'm working with my more sensitive folks, we tend to like to lead with a lot of context, the background. Let me tell you how we got here and all the people involved and what the different considerations were.
And you lost them.
You lost them. You lost them, right? And so getting right, bottom line up front, speaking in bullet points, all of that is flexing your style. And I was talking with clients about this the other day. It's totally fine to give them the headline and then say, I'm happy to go deeper on this. I have more I can share. But first, let me get your reaction to that, right? So you can reveal that you have more than that, but respect their communication style. And they may say, actually, no, that's enough. Let's move on. That sounds good. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just those small tweaks that can make just such a big difference.
And it is simple, right? It's just like, here's bullet points, here's a headline, and then stop and ask, like, do you want me to go deeper? But I mean, you just kind of have to your point, it is flexing, but it's also like building a different habit.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it as like learning a little bit of a new language.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Mexico one summer when I was young, and I remember going to the bus stop, and there was always the American tourists who would shout in English, thinking like if they were louder, that the person would understand. And no matter how much I would say, like, they don't speak English, like they don't know what you're saying. They just know that you're shouting. But to the metaphor, to your point, is if you just even know a few words, then you're trying. Yeah. And the person is more than willing. I remember talking to an engineer one time, and I said, he goes, storming, norming, performing, right? There's this bullshit HR stuff that you say with all these words that don't make any sense. And I said, hey, knock it off. I mean, I know what this kind of code is, and I know what this language is, and I know what buffering is, and I know what this stuff is. And so, I mean, I learned your language. What is it about mine, right? And he's like, actually, I think it's a really good message. I just don't like the words that you use. and I remember he was like, it's so rich, it's so rhymey. And so what I'm using your example is, he was saying, go deeper. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, in his language, he was saying, I just don't like go deeper. Tell me more about what it is you're talking about, because actually I think it makes sense. Yeah. But I can't get past the words. Mm-hmm. And so, like learning a new language, you can start by being fluent enough to get what you need.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And like you were saying, sometimes it's just small tweaks. Mm-hmm. So another challenge I'll see is when someone is more tactical themselves or more process oriented, and their boss is more of a big picture thinker, a strategic 10,000 100,000 foot level thinker. And I've had people who will get feedback on their performance reviews saying that we don't think you're ready for the next level of leadership because
you're not strategic enough.
You're not strategic enough, right?
Yeah.
And when you can start making a connection between your idea and the vision, right? Just even using some of that language of here's how this new process I'm suggesting actually ladders up to our 1-year vision. Your boss, it's, you make the connection for someone. Right. You can't just expect, this goes back to, kind of taking control of your own path. Don't expect someone to understand your narrative. You have to explicitly tell them what you want them to know. Don't expect people to do the cognitive heavy lifting of putting the pieces together for themselves, because they either won't or they might make the wrong interpretation.
Right. The other commentary to that is in the weeds, right?
Yes.
The other advice I would give a lot of people in startups in particular is, if you speak on behalf of the customer, you can say almost anything. Right. And that's the bigger that's back to your knowing what the vision is. But if you're creating a product or a service that affects a consumer or a customer, then that's a great tip of like, if you can always go there, then who's going to argue with that, right? If you want to make things better for the consumer or the customer, or whoever that is.
So a lot of employees, to your point, Melody, like expect you to know. Expect the leader to just know. Like, they should just get me and how I communicate. And what I like about what you're saying is like you're telling these individuals, like, you control this. Like, this is your responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the other person. But I often find that it's hard to get people there, or leaders don't recognize that their people are doing this. So what are your thoughts there and advice?
Tips?
Yeah. Again, at the end of the day, it's best if it's a two-way street. Right. Your boss has to care and try, and you have to care and try. Ideally, that's the situation we want.
That's a really good message.
Your boss has to care and try, and you have to care and try. And a couple of things, it goes back to remembering bosses are people too. They're human. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of pressures on them. And so if you can have a bit of that upward empathy, even to say something like, there may be dynamics that are happening above that I'm not even aware of. So if you're able to help me understand those a little clearer, I'd be able to support you better on this, or I could come with ideas that are a better fit. Even just acknowledging that you realize their situation, because they're in a tough spot, especially middle managers, where they're feeling it from both ends. But going back to, for example, the styles conversation that I was talking about before, which is basically having a conversation about your work preferences, your communication style, and all that. It benefits your boss to know how to get the best performance out of you. Yeah. So if you can, beginning of the year, beginning of a new quarter, using any sort of those markers of time is a great opportunity to have a discussion to say, I'm looking ahead to whatever, the next year, the next quarter. I want to make sure I'm delivering the most value for you in terms of how we give one another feedback. When I have comments for you on XYZ, how would you like me to share those? Is even things like, is Messenger better than email? Do you want me to do that?
Like Slack?
First thing in the morning.
Yeah.
That gives you an opening to then say, thank you so much for sharing that. From my end, here's what would be helpful when you need to give me feedback, because obviously that's going to happen too. And so just make it an even exchange. Ask them.
So
and then,
golden. Yeah. It's so important, right? I mean, information, the whole waterfall theory of communication is just wrong, right? It's like, the CEO says, I don't understand why everybody's not, understanding what I said. I'm like, well, you said it to a group of 50 people who are 6 levels away from the people that are doing the job, right? And that's empowerment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? That you have the power to say, this is what I need. This is what I want. How can I make it? How can I be better? You don't have to wait for a performance review.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not saying, I understand that I'm failing. And so, I'm not on a PIP.
Yeah. But what's the biggest mistake people make in managing up?
Ooh. The biggest.
3 biggest.
3 biggest. Okay. The first one that comes to mind. So as I said, the book is based around these conversations. Another one of the conversations is the feedback conversation. And in there, I talk about this method I have of giving feedback to your boss, A, B, C. A is assumption. B is behavior. C is change. Most people, when they give feedback to their manager, lead with A. They lead with their assumption. You're micromanaging me. You've taken away my autonomy. You're sidelining me. You're whatever. You're making.
It's like an accusation.
Yes, you're making an accusation about your boss's behavior. But as both of you know, the most effective.
And they find that highly offensive.
Exactly. Because they don't see it that way, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have so much better luck if you focus on the behavior and the change. So if you focus on B and C. And so when you're giving your boss feedback, first, ask for permission. And by that, I mean, just get a micro yes, like, hey, is now a good time to talk? Oh, could we talk about that last client meeting? Sure. Or actually, no, now's not a good time. Get that micro buy-in so that they're a bit more open to whatever comes next instead of just, hey, we need to talk. You're micromanaging me. That's, nobody wants that.
No. But that is often how it goes.
Yes. Yeah. So get the micro yes. Then,
well, if you do it right, I wouldn't have to.
Right. Yes. Create a shared goal is also very important in terms of, I think we can both agree that we want what's best for the customer here. Or I'm trying to think of another one. That's a good go-to. That one.
Yeah. We want to, let's be more efficient so we can be on time.
Exactly.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then talking about what's the behavior when this happens, here's the consequence here. And then what's the suggestion? Would it be helpful if I put together a project brief in advance so we have the accountabilities for this clear up front? putting out there the change you would like to see as either a question or a statement is much better than just leading with the accusation.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So is there more mistakes that big ones that people make?
We already talked about believing your boss is a mind reader. Let's see. I think the other one I would call the myth of the performance review, which is people think that performance reviews are where decisions are made, when in fact they're where decisions are communicated. And so if you are not.
Yeah,
that's
or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or not. And so you have to be, if you are interested in advancement in any form, whether it's a promotion, it's a stretch project, it's growing your team, whatever it is, you need to be seeding that interest for months in advance. The first time your boss hears about those ambitions should not be in the couple of weeks or the moment of your performance review. Yet I see so many people say, well, I thought I was going to get a promotion. I thought the bonus was coming.
Yeah.
Well, you should have been having a conversation 6 months ago about, hey, I would like to make sure I'm in a position to receive a bonus this year. What do you need to see from me to make that possible? And tracking against that. So that's another mistake.
Even what you just said maybe scared the shit out of people to say that, right? To like talk to their boss that way. Like, how do you get them, confident enough to say that? Like, hey, I really want a bonus this year. How do I get one?
maybe you don't start there, right? Maybe you don't start there. The conversations build on one another. And so for example, the first one is alignment, getting on the same page about priorities, goals, yours and theirs. Then we have styles. Then we have ownership, boundaries, feedback. And so if you're doing this, you're sort of layering on trust. So that when you get to a conversation about advancement or money, you've built more credibility. You have more social capital with your manager to lean on, to make some of those like quote unquote riskier asks. And if it may feel too big to start with asking for a bonus, but you may ask for, I'd like one more direct report.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this blog that you wrote. And it's about getting raises and how you helped people get raises at Google and Amazon and Microsoft, and I'm sure many, many more. I think in the blog you say that there's a myth that there's a perfect time to ask, right? But it is, it is a delicate balance of how you do this. And Patty and I have been in the many conversations when people have done it well, and many, many, many where they have not done it well. So tell our listeners, how do you get a raise if you want one?
Well, sometimes are better than others. There's no perfect time, but certainly, to Patty's point, make sure you're keeping an eye on the company's financials, be listening in all hands for the type of, are they talking about growth? Are they talking about austerity and hiring freezes? I mean, you have to have some level of organizational awareness there. But I think in addition to, in that article, I talk about planting seeds early. That's important. And also that idea of contracting around a checklist of sorts, so that let's just talk about a promotion, for example, like you say, I want to get to a director or a VP role in the next year. What is that going to take? What do you need to see from me that's not true right now in that time? And your boss may give you a couple of different things, and that gives you the opportunity every, 2-3 months or so to check in on that and say, I've made this progress towards this. How are we doing? Am I still on track? And so again, it becomes more of a inevitability versus this mystical thing that may or may not be granted to you.
Right.
And I think when it comes to raises in particular, money in particular, the mistake people make is that they over-index on what they've done in the past and proving past results, and they don't talk enough about the future ROI they can create. And so, I know what's that phrase, past performance is not indicative of future results, but this is kind of an exception to that. So yes, it's
because
important.
They're trying to prove they have
to make a case.
Stuff I did. Yeah.
Good job.
Yay. Good job.
Good job. We might give you a raise.
Yeah. She gets a raise. you join us in a career confession?
Sure.
Okay. Do you want me to read it, Patty?
Yes, please.
Well, this is great one for you, Melody. Mm-hmm. The title is, Am I Being Oversensitive? Ever since I moved into a new team 6 months ago, one colleague constantly gives me overly critical feedback on our joint projects. For the most part, it's constructive, but there's barely ever any positive notes. And on a few occasions, offhand remarks that are just rude and unhelpful. Should I just keep on being the bigger person, or should I talk to our boss about it? It's starting to make me feel inadequate at my job, but I don't want to look petty or even get them in trouble.
It's a good one. It's a good one. So what I would say is, before going to your manager, it's like, kind of like kids on the playground. Try to resolve it.
Mom.
Yeah. Try to resolve it between yourselves. And what I would offer to this person is to try steering that person in the right direction, because you might be dealing with someone who just, they just have a more pessimistic frame that they come from. And so when you're dealing, like, I would call this person like a naysayer type, try to ask them questions or even frame the conversation to say, before we get into drawbacks, we're going to focus on what is working here. Okay. And so then even when they get into a drawback, loop them back in and say, okay, I hear you. We'll get to that in a minute, but what is going well, or what do you like about this design? By the same token, at the end, once they've gone through everything, okay, I hear X, Y, and Z. You can validate that you've heard the problem and then shift pretty quickly into solutioning. All right, so here's what we're going to do about this. So you're not staying kind of in the negativity with them. Those are the two things I would suggest trying before you go to your manager.
Yeah. And I think it's very important for you to talk to them first. Right. But the other question I don't know, Melody, what your therapist coaching advice would be on this, but the other thing that I might do myself is to say to this person, hey, I really like it that you like to give so much feedback. And some of your feedback is really helpful. Also, I find some of your feedback to be only focused on negatives, right? And maybe this is your point of drawing out the positives, but how do you and I talk about things that are positive too? Or, on the rude stuff, like sometimes I find it to be a little rude and more at me than the project, right? Like you can say things like that too. I don't know what, Melody, your expert coaching, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to draw it out, that, hey, I hear a lot, like I might say, I hear a lot about what needs improvement. It would also be great to hear about what is working well so that we can both build on that. Again, like what's in it for them to share with you, what more of the positives.
Or even asking for their advice.
Yeah.
I hear that. Okay, what could I do differently that might make that better? Right? Because the problem I've found with the people that think that feedback is telling you bad stuff is they don't ever tell you what's good stuff.
Yes.
And it's not just the good stuff, but how to do the good stuff. I mean, you might be doing it. They just don't see it, right? Oh, you mean like when I did that? Yeah. Oh, okay. So how might I talk to you about that in a different way, right? I mean, just more. The other thing is, there are always teachable moments, especially, so the thing about the bad boss is that sometimes they're the bad boss because nobody's ever said, tell me what I could do differently.
Yeah.
Help me, coach me.
Yeah.
I could do that if you would get this out of my way. I have an obstacle and I don't know what to do with it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then the boss is like, oh, I thought I was just supposed to give you feedback. The other part is like, and then what? Right. And how will you know? How would you know? Okay. If I fixed all the 973 things you just talked about, how would I know that I'm making progress?
Yeah.
So that they kind of go, oh, I guess I never have really, the boss goes back then and says, I guess I didn't tell her what a great job she did on that thing.
Yeah. We always ask for like a little nugget of advice to wrap things up. Melody, what's your one nugget you want to leave our listeners?
You teach people how to treat you at work. and you have more power over how people respond to you than you think.
Ooh, I just got little goosebumps.
That is wonderful. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, I like that you are in control. You are in power. You can do this.
And how practical it is. Where can we reach you? Where can our listeners find you?
You can find my book, my first book, Trust Yourself, and my new book, Managing Up, wherever books are sold. You can also head to managingup.com. All the information will be there.
Yay! Thank you, Melody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Truth Works. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.